Okay, bringing to our episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. It's a really cool review for you guys from the brand Monta. A little bit about them. They were founded back in 2015 out of the good old US of A. And their watches are born in St. Louis, Missouri, but are also all made in Switzerland in terms of, you know, of course, the brainchilding, the design, and pretty much everything is run out of St. Louis. They just happen to use some of the finest factories in Switzerland to get these produced for you guys. Now, in terms of where they fit within the grand landscape of the microbrand world, they're really a leader within that microbrand mid-tier Swiss luxury market. You know, at this point, if you've heard of Monta, you've pretty much heard great things, and you know, some of it may have been from this channel, and I still stand behind that in terms of the level of attention to detail, and just those finer points that you don't necessarily look for or need. I mean, it goes above just a level of a premium product. I mean, it's an actual luxury product. This is much nicer than you will ever need for a dive watch, and those are facts. Like, you don't need a dive watch to be this good, but you know what, your life doesn't need to be this as good as you'd like it, but of course we always want the best. And for those of you that are out there looking for kind of the best money to spend on the absolute top-notch product, this is definitely a contender because they just do so many things right. So this is, of course, a dive watch. Some key characteristics, not only when you're looking for a diver, or you want water resistance simply with some type of screw-down crown, or something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is their Oceanking V3 and the 60-minute insert with date at 6 o'clock configuration. It's the third generation of their flagship diver that really started it all. The main differences from the previous gen can be summed up pretty easily. The dial, smaller text and logo with indices brought inward of the outer 60-minute track. The bezel is now 10-minute intervals versus the 15-minute interval seen previously. Also, you're getting wider track proportions of that insert, and you're getting a more symmetrical gear tooth grip layout. The case has wider lug shoulders with smoother integration into those crown guards, and the clasp has increased curvature with added contouring details to really flow with the bracelet links. While arguably more of an evolution than a revolution, it's still distinctly different enough from the previous generation to warrant the next generation moniker. And at $2,500, well, $2,550 direct from the brand, yeah, this is an absolute luxury product, if you ask me. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, now let's get into some of the dimensions here. Well, you're going to have about 40.5 millimeters. It's really, and that's at the bezel. At the case, it's actually about 40 millimeters across. Like, if you were to measure it, let's say from the 2 o'clock to the 8 o'clock, you can see there's a bit of overhang from that beautiful, now symmetrical grip there. You can see pretty much for every point there's an equal space there now for the grip that goes inward and outward versus it just being kind of sliced in. So very, very cool. And again, it's just little touches like that that just show that little extra level of thought in terms of design. Now the thickness is only 11.9 millimeters, and you can see this is going to wear very, very thin. I really do like the visual breakdown on this watch. The mid case is distinctly the mid case. The bezel is distinctly the bezel, and the case back is distinctly the case back. So you're not going to see something that flows super organically to feel like one big blob. It's going to feel very compartmentalized visually, and you have some great lines that your eye can follow. And again, it's going to equal a thin experience, because you can have a thinner watch that wears thicker, and you can also have a thicker watch that wears thin. This one, I would say, is relatively thin, and it wears relatively thin. So good job by Monta Monta by really dialing in those proportions. In terms of the lug to lug, 47.7 millimeters lug to lug. This is all 316L stainless steel. It's brushed and polished, and you can see, the brushing here is a very high standard. This is, of course, a pressed loaner, so this has been a few places, but you can still see the hairline polishing there is very nice. Also, so the hairline brushing, the satinization is very nice, and then that high polished is very, very clean as well. Of course, it's just going to show some signs of wear, but you can see the clean beveling, the very sharp transition there between brushed and polished. And another thing that I did mention before was how much more organic now those crown guards are in terms of the way that they flow with that mid case. So very, very nice. And again, these are all things that objectively improve the watch in terms of the build quality, in terms of the execution, everything like that. This is the best Oceanking they've ever made. Now, where there might be some room for contention or conversation is going to be in terms of the design, because it did, with the changes that they've made, it has gone kind of more into a mainstream vein, versus before there were certain aspects. If you liked them, that's great. But a lot of people within this space will really settle for just liking something because it's different and noticeably different than what it wants to recapture. So like, if you can have the feeling of Submariner without it looking like a Submariner, that's kind of the name of the game within the affordable space. But I will say, that's not necessarily a long-term wearable thing, right? It's just to have it not look like something else, right? Because if you want the balance and the truly capturing that essence, there are certain things that you kind of do have to do, right? And they dialed in those proportions, and now this proportionally is, it's perfect. It's a perfect watch. Unfortunately, there's other perfect watches, quote unquote, that are going to have a very similar aesthetic. And that's just part of the game, unfortunately. Now, getting into some more of the details here, the sapphire is flat with an inner AR coating, about 7 layers, so it's going to keep that beautiful glossy dial nice and visible. Also, another difference is this bezel. Whew! The 60-click bezel they used to have was one of the best bezel actions on the market. This 120-click, oh my, it's just, for me, what I look for is that balance between smooth and clicky. This is not harsh at all, even though the clicks are super audible. It still feels very smooth. So I dig that very much. Let me give it a quick wipe here off camera, because it is quite glossy in its finish, which means it's going to have fingerprints and whatnot on it. But I want to present it to you guys, in its full glory. Actually, let me even shoot some of the dust off of that crystal there. So yeah, the 120 click unidirectional rotating bezel is fantastic. Ceramic insert is great. And now they switch to a lume pip versus it having it fully lumed index. Me personally, I prefer the pip, because the pip, as you can see here, is pretty well protected. Unfortunately, when you do that open lume, it tends to take on a patina. And that happened to my Monta Oceanking V2. And it's probably one of the reasons I don't wear it as much as I would like to, because for me, it just sticks out. Like, once that bezel insert gets a little bit of patina on it, it's just something like you can't unsee. And you know what? No one else will notice but me. But hey, I have so many watches, it's just easy to kind of get lost in those little types of details. Now, the crown is screw down, as you guys can see, nicely signed as well. And although you can't see it, on the other side of this, and I will say this is contoured fantastic. There's sharp lines in terms of the definition and the level of fit and finish, but this is not sharp to the touch. Like, this feels amazing on the back of the wrist. Like, I'm blown away that they don't advertise how beautifully contoured the case back is, because this honestly, like, it almost gives you like an ASMR type of like fidget factor of how nice this feels. Like, as much as I like turning the bezel, guys, feeling this case bag, it's like, I don't know, it's almost like a skipping stone. It just has a certain organic, just beautiful feel to it. And I don't know, I just really dig that. But what you can't see is the movement, and the movement inside, thankfully, although marketed as their M22, it's the Sellita SW300. And the reason why they give themselves that M22 moniker, it's because, hey, they're a brand that don't have a proprietary movement. So what they do is they'll create that title, and then if Sellita runs out, they can still put out watches with an ETA movement inside. Or hey, maybe in a couple of months they want to do a small run and, you know, try out some other movements. There's a lot of cool ones, especially within that Swiss space right now, like the Lejeune Perret or something like that, that has an extended power reserve. The cool thing is this actual SW300 does have an extended power reserve as well. It now has 56 hours of power reserve, and it still maintains that 4 hertz sweep and beat rate. And of course, the Sellita SW300 is a tried and tested movement, so it's very good. Again, the M22 moniker, it's not really meant to try to market anything. It's really just to give them that lateral play, just in case something happens, because, you know, they've been around for a long time and they know what it's like when ETA decides to change its rules on who they're going to give and not give movements to. So with that, it's all behind that beautifully done solid case back. Getting into the dial here, guys, gloss black lacquer dial, full applied indices, date at the 6 o'clock, which is framed, polished sword hands, rhodium plated, BGW9 Swiss Superluminova, 300 meters of water resistance, 1,000 feet. Also, if you do the math on it, one of the nice things that they changed too is it says 300 meters instead of 304. Hey, you know, there's a lot of feedback they got over the time, you know, and it all kind of comes together. And I know sometimes if you're not following a brand very closely, you might just see changes or you might miss certain changes. But I will say there have been conversations, throughout the microbrand zeitgeist about so many of these little changes that come together to really create, again, pretty much a perfect watch. So the bracelet, another huge feature and a huge plus, that's something that's been evolving over time, is going to be solid end links, 20 millimeter width, solid full 3-link fully articulated bracelet, screw pin construction, 4 millimeter taper down to 16 millimeters, solid milled 18.8 millimeter flip lock clasp with a 6 position on the fly micro adjust, which is going to you can see here, a very similar kind of look to what you might see in a Rolex Glide Lock style. So, but one thing you're going to also notice is some high-end features like, hey, check that out. Ceramic friction ball there for the retainer. So again, there's a lot of nice things. This cool little puck system that they created to really get that in there. And this is really thin. Like, they've done a lot of work to make sure that this flows really beautifully. And then of course that curvature makes it visually appear shorter, even though this is kind of the longer version of their clasp, because they wanted to give more room so that you could potentially use this also, not just for micro adjusts on the fly, but also as, a diver's extension if needed. So with all that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this just wears perfectly. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion, and it's going to possibly appear a bit larger than it really is. Check that out, right? Like, oh, it's really dominating my wrist. But one thing that even the distortion can't hide is look at how flat this lays, and look at the contours and just how everything flows really perfectly. You're seeing that bevel on the case just slide right down into those beautifully articulated links that have such a beautifully tight tolerance, guys. There's no sag, no play, but you're getting all that articulation, so things just feel fantastic as you wear. But one thing I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame here so you guys can get still a detailed look, just with a bit of a true aspect ratio. Now look at the way that sits on the wrist. Doesn't seem as overwhelming or overpowering. And although I do have a slightly larger wrist at 7.5 inches, I will say it is quite round, as you guys can see. So it's not like it's super flat and wide and just very accommodating for any large watch. I am very conscious about the watches that I wear and how how they fit. And I wear a wide range, some very large, that 43 and up, and also a lot of 38 and under as well. Ultimately, a lot of it has to do with proportions and less with scale, not the absolute dimensions, but really the balance of dimensions in terms of the way, the ratio of size of the dial versus the bezel versus the crown guards, the lugs, the lug to lug, and how it all just kind of comes together. And I will say Monta, pretty masterfully again, have just found a way to just take perfection and push it forward even deeper into just like, wow, that type of territory. So this is fantastic. I mean, really great proportions, very classic. And you guys can see it just hugs the wrist beautifully, lays on there, and it feels quite luxurious, right? It's not just premium. It's not just the nicest that you could have. It's really nicer than you need in so many little places where some people won't even be able to appreciate them just because they don't necessarily have exposure to either, other pieces, downstream or upstream, right? Having the context of handling some really high-end pieces and also handling a ton of super affordable pieces, you start to notice those little nuances and those like little qualities that make things just feel that much better. And, the team at Monta definitely has a good pulse on all of those little items. So with that said, let's actually get it off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, really beautiful lume here, very thickly and evenly applied, which is something you can't necessarily say for some of its competition, namely, let's say the Tudor Pelagos 39, where a lot of people have reported complaints about the hands just not being quite as bright. So hey, I think this looks fantastic. And again, ultimately legible, maybe doesn't quite stand out, doesn't have that extra level of complexity that previous generations have had. But what you do get in return is just a certain level of balance and refinement that just, I don't know, it just speaks to me. One thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe include a bit of harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here, thanks to the resolution of 4K, is going to be, a little couple micro scratches here and there, maybe a little bit of dust or debris on the outer case or crystal. But man, that beautifully dark ceramic insert, that gloss, that glossy lacquer dial, they just render so black. The deep contrast is really outstanding. I mean, as good as the lume is, you don't necessarily need the lume because that dark black is very truly inky black. It's not gonna hit a certain angle and all of a sudden wash out and be a bright anthracite or something. This is going to be a black dial watch, regardless of the lighting situation. And that is something that, again, very clean, very classic. And then that little pop of red, of course, in that red text, another kind of Rolex callback, is very, very cool and much appreciated. Now, in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, really classic, perfect proportions, very comfortable and balanced wear, even more refined with each new iteration. It feels less worried about, details that those previous, models kind of added for differentiation, and more focused on an overall cleaner and more minimalist approach to its design, right? Again, it's not worried about looking over it like, I have to make sure I'm doing things different so people don't confuse me with this other watch. It's less self-conscious about that because now people know about Monta, people know about the Oceanking. I feel like you have a little bit more leeway to be unrestrained and say, hey, look, I'm just going to make the best watch that I can make. And yeah, there's some really great watches that are out there that have, you know, maybe a similar look, and you know, that's just it is what it is. So in terms of model variants, there are no variations currently at the time of recording this, but definitely check the site links for future updates. This is a tough one because it's like, it's so good with the 6 o'clock date window. Like, do you even need to make a no date because it's already symmetrical? And then in terms of the bezel insert, you know, it's just perfect the way it is. And if you really, you know, wanted to do something more of a traveler style, they have some GMT options. You don't necessarily need to do a 12-hour bezel insert. I don't know what the future is going to hold for future variations of this, but I will say this right here is pretty quintessential in terms of the configuration. So, you know, I don't really foresee them needing to make any other variations apart from, of course, I would love a dark blue option. I would actually really like a different a two-tone. For me, I think this would be great. I would love to see let's say a blue bezel, ceramic bezel insert, and then like a gray sunray or anthracite, you know, kind of more metallic dial. I think that would be fantastic. Now in terms of comparable models, you know, Monta's done enough with the Oceanking line to really establish it as one of the finest mid-tier luxury divers on the market, comparable to even mainstream industry darlings from Tudor, Breitling, Oris, and Seiko, which are, you know, all priced higher than this particular model in terms of some of its comparables. So guys, the bottom line, yeah, so much of microbrand desirability is definitely tied to savings, but if you take most of, you know, even the very best microbrand divers and price them in the $2,500 range, Monta is one of the few that would actually still feel like a value at this price point. So it leads me to believe that that's why, you know, they're priced appropriately. Like, yes, there are some really great other brands that are out there that and I've reviewed I own a bunch of those watches, and those are great. But honestly, if you slapped a $2,500 sticker price on a lot of those watches, I would not feel the same way. For some reason, this watch at this price point still just feels like a blessing. Like, I'm happy that we're still in a time where Montas are able to be purchased at, you know, beneath $5,000, and it, you know, the trajectory that they're on, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they start being up there. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.